So as we sit here, you might notice we can still feel, sense the aliveness of the body. Maybe on a broad level it feels tense, tight, open, spacious. And just notice that. Touch of our body on the ground. Really invite a quality of mindfulness into our whole life, not just that time when we close our eyes and I use a meditation voice. And so this topic for the day, what I'm calling the Five Remembrances, or the five subjects for contemplation. And this was a teaching given by the Buddha, one of the old discourses. And I'm using Thich Nhat Hanh's translation. It's more or less the same thing, but a little simpler. I rather like his use of language. And I read them in the meditation, but I'm just going to read it once more. This list of things the Buddha says that everyone should reflect and contemplate upon frequently. He says, monks and nuns, lay people like all of us, folks who are young or old, healthy or unhealthy, he says everyone would benefit from frequently reflecting upon these five things. I am of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. I am of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape ill health. I am of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape being separated from them. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. And in the text where the Buddha instructs people to reflect on these, after going through in that way, he goes through again and has us reflect that I am not the only one. He says every single human being is also subject to these five things. I am not the only one. And we are all siblings in aging, illness, death, and loss. Really, this was the start of the Buddhist path. At least the story were passed down. Maybe it's a little mythological, the cute little story, but certainly this is the reflection that spurred the Buddha to a spiritual path. And the story is that he lived a fairly sheltered life, a lot of pleasure, mostly just got what he wanted in a palace. And then one day he goes out into the village just to walk around. And he sees someone very old. And it just strikes him, oh my goodness, someday that's going to happen to me. He sees someone in the village incredibly sick. And it just strikes him, I'm of that same nature. That's going to happen to me. Continuing to walk around, he sees a corpse. And it just really strikes him. I think all of us have had those moments where something we've seen 1,000 times before, there's that one time it just hits us on another level. So in this story, he sees that corpse and it just really hits him. Whoa, that's going to happen to me. To everyone, all of my loved ones, everyone. And apparently he was a little distraught initially at these sights and these reflections. And then he saw this, a monk, an ascetic, with this serene look on his face, walking around. And he thought, how is it that amidst this reality of aging, illness, and death, one could walk around so serene? And he said, well, if someone else can do it, I can do it too. And that set him off on his spiritual quest. And today, to go into these, I'm going to primarily focus on the reflection on death. This is the one the Buddha emphasized more than any other. And it's really what the first four are all about. And we don't like aging and illness because they bring us closer to death. Everything we're separated from that's dear to us, that is a kind of death. You know, someone moves away, the end of an era in your life, there's some loss there. So all of these sort of come back to mortality. And also I'll talk a bit about the fifth one, which is, I think, very important. It says, wait a minute, it's not all just hopeless and despair. There's actually something you can do. Something that holds everything in its cards. You have the power to move yourself towards that serene monk, to have that spiritual sobriety. So a few months ago, I was sitting in my office in my house, and there's a window into my backyard, and we have a couple dogs. One of my dogs, one of her pastimes is chasing squirrels. But I've never actually imagined that one day she would catch a squirrel. But I saw out of the corner of my eye her prancing around the backyard with a squirrel in her mouth. And I was like, oh my goodness. So I got up and I went out. And there was this dead squirrel sitting in the pathway just outside the house. And I looked down and I was like, oh my goodness. This squirrel is here. Its hair was still standing up. It had a freshness to it. Except it was completely flaccid, just lifeless. It just really struck me. I was like, this was just alive minutes ago, and now it's not. This will happen to me, to everyone I love someday. And maybe it was particularly on the mind. I had recently come back from my grandmother's funeral, which was just another one of these little reminder bells of reality. You know, this woman who had cared for me when I was young. I would go spend sleepovers on the weekends. I saw throughout my whole life. Over the course of a decade, I saw it deteriorate little by little by little by little, to the point there wasn't really a lot left in the last year or so. It's like, oh, yeah. When I really opened that file, open to this reality of death, and I think back to my first encounter. I was 6 years old and my other grandmother had passed away, and I was told Grandma went away. I said, well, where did she go? And it was probably something explained to me like heaven or a better place. And I said, okay, well, can I go visit her? What does that mean? It just really didn't make any sense to me as a 6-year-old. Kind of bewildering. I remember another one of these reminder bells really touched me when I was 19. I had worked at a grocery store for a number of years, and there was this other gal at the grocery store I had a little crush on for a while, about my age. And one day she was driving in the icy winter and got into a car accident and died. And it just was like, wait a minute, only old people are supposed to die. 19. I said, what? It makes no sense. And really what I'm getting at, each one of us has our own litany of similar stories. These ways that death has touched us. Like it's all around us. The reminder bells are there. Here today as a community, we have another reminder bell, the memorial of KB. It's just, oh yeah, this is real, this is part of life. And I'm only 40 years old, but I'm starting to witness the body not be able to do things it used to. More aches and pains. I have to pee more in the middle of the night. To stretch more before activity, lest I injure myself. I won't bore you with the details of my medical life, but more or less good health, but just all these little reminders, these little signs. Hey, aging, it's happening to you. Death is coming. And if we really pay attention, I don't think we actually have to do some great death contemplation all the time, some great thinking exercise on aging and illness. Really, we just open to reality. Like it's all around us. I often reflect that we think the cause of death is, a car accident or old age or cancer. But really the cause of death is birth. The mortality rate is 100%. I almost think of it like a car has a limited amount of miles. This human being has a limited number of seconds, hours, years. Sure, maybe you really push the curve, you make it to 115 or something like that, but okay, what's that in the scope of the cosmos? Not a lot. And in that way, it's not even that someday we're going to die, but more that we are already dying. Like it's happening all around us. And this really isn't meant to be something depressing or sad. I was talking to a family member yesterday. He's not a meditator, not a Buddhist. They said, oh, what are you going to talk about tomorrow morning? I said, the recollection of aging, illness, and death. They're like, ooh, sounds depressing. Like, well, this is the culture we live in. That is the cultural attitude. Sounds depressing. Sounds heavy. Where's light and breezy? I want light and breezy. And it taps into this deeper cultural current of death avoidance, death denial, death fear. This way that we see aging, illness, and death as these problems to be solved. almost as if it's a sign of failure. The mortality rate is 100%. And yet, the language we use, I'm going to fight cancer. I'm going to beat this illness. I was reading this book from Stephen Jenkinson called Die Wise, and he said our palliative care in this culture is based around hope, cope, and dope. Not face reality, see the nature of it, be grateful for your life, have an open heart till the last tick. No, hope, cope, and dope. Anything we can do to get away from it. I found it interesting, cope, you might think, well, that one, fair enough. You got to deal with the difficulty. But so the word cope, apparently, the etymology comes from the French word coup, which most of us know as the hostile military takeover of a government. So that is the word we use to deal with illness and the reality of death. It's pointing to this cultural soup that we're all swimming in. One very prominent Thai monk, supposedly very highly enlightened, John Donne, I read one of his books, and he reflected that he thought, even if you didn't meditate, just reflecting on mortality frequently, continually, was enough to get you to the first stage of enlightenment. It's kind of powerful. It's like there's that much holding on and clinging and attachment to just this idea of life, of I'm going to beat the 100% mortality rate, or at least delay it as long as possible. In this actual discourse from the Buddha, where he lists these remembrances or recollections, I've shared there's the part he just states them. There's the part he says, well, I'm not the only one. And there's another part, which I find very interesting, where he uses the language of intoxication. He says, we are intoxicated with youth, intoxicated with health, intoxicated with life. We cling tightly to what we love, what we hold dear. And his commentary is this limits us. It limits us to go around our life intoxicated. Maybe some of you are thinking, well, I don't know. Life is pretty awesome. Why not be intoxicated with it? But as I shared a little earlier, I spent a good chunk of years in my late teens and early 20s intoxicated with alcohol quite a lot of the time. It was nice. I had a nice time those years, but when I actually sobered up, everything was a little more vivid. That's really the most prominent thing in memory. Colors were more vivid, the wind was more vivid, my emotions were more vivid, my relationships were more vivid. Everything just came to life a little bit more. It's like, oh, I'm living a little bit more deeply, a little more fully, a little more responsive to what's actually happening. It's as if to be intoxicated, I sort of blunted and muted some of life. And so to sober up, really life just became more precious. To really attune to feel, to sense the preciousness of what it is to be alive. In its full range of pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow. And so to sober up to how things are, to sober up to the reality of aging, illness, death, and loss, it invites this preciousness. Invites a depth of care and heart. in the Metta Sutta, Buddha's discourse on loving kindness. He has this line I've always loved. He says, "Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart one should cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world." To sober up spiritually is to open to that world, to open to this cherishing of all living beings, to open to this vestibule of kindness. I like the first precept, many of you know, is to abstain from killing, or really violence or harming. And it plays on this central ethic in Buddhism is non-harming. But I love how Thich Nhat Hanh, the way he's very poetic. He frames that first precept as the mindfulness training of revering life. To sober up is to cherish, to see the preciousness, to revere. To me, that's not depressing. If I said, "Oh, I learned today how to cherish life. I learned how to revere living beings more deeply, to open my heart more fully," it's not so sad or depressing. It's quite wonderful. The Buddha, at one point, uses this sort of outrageous analogy to describe how rare and precious it is to be a human, where he says, imagine the entire earth was covered in water, and there were a blind sea turtle swimming around this great planet. And once every 100 years, this blind sea turtle would come up to the surface and poke its head out of the water. And now, imagine there were a small ring floating on the surface of this great earth, about the size of this singing bowl. What are the chances that this sea turtle would poke its head through that ring, floating around the entire surface of the earth? And then the monks reply, it would be very rare. And the Buddha says, yes. And in the same way, it is that rare to be born a human, to get to experience this human life, to get to sober up on the deepest level possible. So rare to have that opportunity. This is a practice of kind of getting out of hope, cope, and dope, and sobering up to the way things are. The Dalai Lama, when asked what surprised him most about humanity, answered, man, because he sacrifices his health in order to make money, then he sacrifices money to recuperate his health. And then he is so anxious about the future that he does not enjoy the present. The result being that he does not live in the present or the future. He lives as if he is never going to die, and then dies, having never really lived. And so, how can our Buddhist or meditative practice help us get out of this trap, help us to really live? In this spiritual sobriety or maturity I'm talking about, in this context, I like to frame as the middle way between avoidance and overwhelm. And on some level, avoidance and overwhelm are clear enough. And avoidance is you just don't want to deal with it. You don't want to open to it. Like, that's depressing. I don't want to go there. I don't want to think about that. And overwhelm, I think most of us are familiar with that. It's almost just too much reality. We get overtaken kind of hijacked by an emotional response, despair, fear, sadness, just drowning. So these are two ways it can go. And there's this middle way. This middle way starts with mindfulness. The mindfulness just to notice, okay, loss is happening, pain is happening, sadness is happening, numbness is happening. To be mindful is to really let ourselves be with whatever the experience is. Just to see it. Okay, this is what's here. I'm willing to be with this. I'm willing to feel it. I'm willing to look at it. Even right now, maybe some of you have kind of an emotional experience happening. Maybe some of you have a bodily experience happening. Body feels calm, open, tense, tight. This willingness to just be with that, to feel it, sense it, open to it. The first noble truth, the Buddha says, there is suffering. And he says suffering is to be understood, to be turned towards, to be gotten intimate with. This is what sets the stage to be able to release it. So there's this first movement of just the willingness to be with it, whatever it is. There's also a part of this sobriety about wisdom, of really taking in aging, illness, death, loss are not bad things. They are not problems. It's just the nature of life. An oak tree has a lifespan. A squirrel has a lifespan. A human being has a lifespan. It's just nature. We like to think of ourselves as separate from nature. Oh, no. The squirrels and the oak trees are one thing, and us humans were another. We're all bound by the same laws of space and time. And one way we can kind of start to develop this perspective, this really isn't bad, is by frequently reflecting upon these things. I went through one period, very simple practice. I just read these every day for a month. Thought it was a very beautiful practice. It's very simple, but it's just taking in this contemplation. Oh yeah. Going through our life, using, when we see aging, illness, death, loss, to notice that part of us that instinctively wants to get away from it, that instinctively judges it, instinctively says, that's bad. I don't like that. I shared my grandmother passed earlier this year, and she really was very much a shell of herself the last year. You could hardly interact with her. And a number of my family members didn't really want to go see her because it bummed them out to see someone in that state. It's like, I don't want to experience that. The fear of overwhelm leads to avoidance. But this spiritual sobriety is like, wait a minute, can I be in that? Can I be willing to feel the pain of seeing a loved one in that kind of state? Because someday it's going to be me. There is also this deeper meditative level of all this. where I know those of you who have done quite a lot of insight practice or meditation practice, something really does start to shift internally, where it's as if the ego or the little me stops so much being the center of gravity. There becomes more and more this capacity to have an emotional process without being totally caught by the emotional process. To be able to respond instead of react. So I found the more that I've meditated over these years, and it just kind of happens naturally that it's, oh yeah, this is, sad isn't bad, death isn't bad, okay. It's just emotions, I can be with this. Not in a way that's like a stone-faced Buddha statue that's kind of lifeless, but in a more open-hearted way. It's like, oh yeah, my meditation practice has taught me how to be with the whole gamut. And so I'm here for it. To me, a lot of this process has been about a tenderizing. If the tears want to come, let them come. If the sorrow or anger or fear arises, let it be here. Meet them and explore what is it to meet them without the overwhelm. And you'll slip into the overwhelm. You're like, oh, that's what this is like. This is overwhelm. And then you'll have some space with it. And like, oh, this is what it's like to feel without overwhelm. And you kind of learn your way into that distinction. The clearer it becomes, the easier it is to just incline towards the middle way. Non-overwhelm, non-avoidance. Just the open-hearted, grounded meeting of this moment. I spent a year living in southern Mexico, and I spent a few weeks with a family in a village, a rural village. I had the privilege of being there for the Day of the Dead, and the whole village went to go do visits to the local cemetery. You'd spend a chunk of the day sitting around just talking about your deceased ancestors. There's just such a different cultural tone around death and dying. It was very striking just how different it was than what I've grown into, where you just don't really talk about it. And what is it to create that sort of culture in ourselves, in our family, in our communities? Not that we necessarily, go to this cemetery or do some practice like that, but just we have that attitude of normalization and openness to it. I think there's also a part, just a compassion, a recognizing, oh yeah, this is painful. It's part of the human experience. And just bring some kindness to this, care. I definitely spent a part of my spiritual journey implicitly believing I was supposed to be like the stone-faced Buddha statue and just equanimity my way through everything. And that's great if equanimity is what's arising. Yeah, wonderful. It does seem to happen more and more the more we go on. And yet, sometimes we're not equanimous. We just have a little bit of compassion there, a little humility. I think of this tenderizing, this compassion. It's sort of like aloe vera on a burn. It's this spiritual balm. And so we come even more fully to this fifth recollection on kamma. How we are subject to the consequences of our actions. These actions are the ground upon which we stand. I like to kind of poetically translate that fifth remembrance, or kamma more generally, karma, kamma. I translate it as what you do matters. And it's to say that, yeah, there's aging, illness, death, and loss, and how you relate to this moment, how you relate to yourself, how you relate to other people, that matters. It has an impact. You know, the Buddha in the Metta Sutta, he didn't say, there's aging, illness, death, and loss, so go lay down and be depressed. He said, no, one should cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world. That was his invitation. And so this fifth recollection, it's to say, wait a minute, this stuff is happening, and what I do with my heart, how I train and develop myself, it makes a difference. You know, I could spend the night, you know, I'm feeling kind of off, I could just go watch TV all night. Or maybe I watch TV for 20 minutes and then I meditate and read a book and talk to a friend, go for a walk. So it matters. You know, this recollection is not really an invitation to fuel some sort of capitalistic perfectionism and achievement and accomplishment. Like, oh my goodness, what I do matters, I'm going to die, I need to achieve so many things, and it's just, can we put down that whole track? It's more like, wait a minute, am I living in accordance with my values? Is there something I'm holding on to that I could release? Can I open to nature? Kind of open to this preciousness that's all around me? You know, meditation is a great place to start. You know, coming to a community like this, to really open to, well, what is it to live a sober, humble, heartful life? To have the courage to do that. One reason the Buddha instructs us to regularly reflect upon these things is because they really can inspire us. Say, don't let life go by the wayside. I lived for a time at a Zen center, and we did a month-long practice period, and at the end of every night, they would do this chant. It's kind of spooky in a way. It was you know, in the silence of the night, it's dark, been meditating all day, and someone just comes on the mic and says, life and death are of supreme importance. Time passes swiftly and opportunity is lost. Let us awaken, take heed. Do not squander your life. I'm just saying it, I get goosebumps. What is it to not squander our life? And this is the question of a lifetime. There are all sorts of different practices I could list or ways of reflecting on mortality, but I think it's kind of already been said. On the simplest level, it's more of an attitude than anything, kind of opening to all the reminders that are here. I think I want to pause here, and we have some time left, and what I find really powerful, and with a talk like this, a theme like today, is to actually get a chance to talk to someone and to get to reflect on a powerful question. So what we're going to do shortly, I think we'll get into twos. Just find one other person, and you can kind of opt out if you just don't want to, that's fine. We're going to get with another person and just contemplate, what is the middle way between suppression and overwhelm? With regard to aging, illness, death, and loss, for you, what does that middle way mean? What does it look like? How do you do it? How do you have this kind of spiritual sobriety? Between suppression or avoidance, between that and overwhelm, what is that?